Paul writes in Ephesians chapter 1 that God chose us in Christ before the foundation of the world that we should be holy and blameless before Him. In love, He predestined us for adoption through Jesus Christ. We have been adopted in Christ. We're not unwarranted children by parents who made a mistake somewhere along. God actually chose us. In the early frontier days of the United States, there was this circuit preacher who was going around, and he came across a family that had been wiped out by some disease or something, but there was one boy that was left over, and he was an incorrigible kid, and nobody wanted to assume responsibility for him. So the circuit preacher kind of said, well, okay, you can ride with me, but he was really kind of bogged down by this boy who wasn't very responsive to him and really was quite incorrigible. And then he heard about this family, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. They had their own son, and his name was Sammy, and he had the desire to ask them, as a good Christian family, would they consider assuming some responsibility for Peter. He said, I can't keep taking him around the country like this. And so they prayed about it, and sure enough, they took on that responsibility. And it turned out that where they were living, there was a slough behind it that was kind of contaminated and probably diseased, and it was quarantined off. And Peter and Sammy were playing someday, and Sammy was just an obedient young boy and just a godly little kid. But you know, the providence of God, they became fast friends. They just had each other, and they went out one day to play, and Peter said, hey, let's go swimming over in that swamp over there. And Sammy said, no, it's contaminated. We shouldn't go there. And so Peter said, well, I'm going to go. So he jumped over the barbed wire fence and went swimming for a little bit. Must have cut himself a little bit because he got infected and he got sick. In fact, he got so sick, he was on the verge of dying. And Mom and Dad quarantined off his room and said, Sammy, you can talk to Peter, but don't go in there. And so one day they had to go into town for supplies, and they said, no, don't go in. But you know what? When they came home, because of their love for each other, he found Sammy laying in the bed by Peter, and they were just talking. And strange things sometimes happen, but in this particular case, Peter actually got well, but Sammy got sick. In fact, Sammy died. What a tragedy. A few years later, that circuit preacher was making his rounds again and almost had all forgotten about that incident. And so he decided to ride out to the Smith farm, and he came up and he recognized Mr. Smith and this big old strapping boy standing beside him. And he said, you know, I came by here a few years ago and I dropped off this kid, Peter something or other. He said, whatever happened to him? Mr. Smith reached up, put his arm around this big old strapping boy and said, meet Peter Smith. He's part of our family. We adopted him. That's our station in life. Listen to what Peter says, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of Him who called you out of darkness into His wonderful night. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. We're adopted children of God.
Thanks for following Freedom in Christ Ministries. If you enjoyed watching or listening to this teaching, please follow and share us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.